Mhm.
Could you tell us where the term ahlus-sunnah wal jama'ah, when it originated,
Mhm.
and who it includes?
Well, ahlus-sunnah wal jama'ah, the term itself can be found, in some of the early traditions of the Sahaba. For instance, statements of Umar ibn Khattab, Abu Bakr, like, ahlus-sunnati a'lamu bi kitabillah, that the upholders of the Sunnah are more knowing of the Book of God, things like that. But understanding that these are words in the Arabic language which didn't take on the meaning of a particular designation until later on in history. That Ahlul Sunnati literally just translates as the upholders of the prophetic way or prophetic tradition, those who uphold that. And so Umar saying that was not to say, okay, well, I'm distinguishing myself by name and anybody following me that we're Ahlus Sunnah, in the way that we usually mean it today, that we have a united, uniform doctrine and things like that, as opposed to distinguish ourselves from the other peoples. Now, Ahlus Sunnah, is a very broad term. Of course, as time went on, as the different schools of Islamic creed had developed, Mu'tazila, Asha'ira, Maturidiyya, that the term itself had more significance and bit more meaning, and has been passed down to us today. And so the earlier scholars wanted to distinguish themselves first and foremost from the Shia. And so, for instance, before Ahlul Sunnah, there was the idea of the Shi'atu Ali wa Shi'atu Muawiyah, the faction of Ali and the faction of Muawiyah. And so later on, those who were partisan to Ali, they designated themselves as Ahlul Sunnah. For Shia, of course, naturally they would say because they were actually partisan to Ali, so they were supporters of Ahlul Bayt. Whereas, I'm sorry, so no, it was the opposite. So those who were partisan to Ali were the Shia of Ali, and then those who were partisan to Muawiyah themselves, or not necessarily partisan to Muawiyah, they were referred to by some later scholars as called the people of Nasr, and then you had the people of Rafd. The people of Rafd, they were supporters of Ali, and then the people of Nasr were the partisan people of Muawiyah. And so Ahlus Sunnah, which tried to reconcile the two factions of Nasr and Shia by at least surrendering to the idea that Ali ibn Abi Talib was a haqq, that he was closer to the truth, or he was upon the truth, and Muawiyah himself had a faulty ijtihad. And so, but all of them were Muslims, and so their ijtihad, the one who was in error got one reward, the one who was correct got two rewards as a result of that. And so it started off with simply trying to distinguish between those two factions, and then eventually, it was Jama'ah was added. And Jama'ah is found in the hadith of the 73 sects, as some narrations that mentions that all of the 73 sects would be in the fire except for one, and that one is al-Jama'ah, the collective. So you say, so Ahlus Sunnah wa Jama'ah, the upholders of the prophetic way and the collective itself. That term, again, was utilized to distinguish the Sunni mainstream from the Mu'tazila, Shia, Khawarij, and any of the other so-called aberrant traditions that had appeared during that early period. And and that's what's been passed down to us, is that terminology, And so Ahlus Sunnah, the parameters of Ahlus Sunnah are a bit more inclusive than what traditionally the Shia has been. Although many Shia today are trying to reconcile with the Sunnah in many different ways, and trying to be more inclusive. Because according to traditional Shi'i principles, the Sunnis are not Muslims, because we don't accept the concept of imamah as they do. The concept of the infallible imam, And so, for instance, the Sahaba who opposed Ali, that they themselves, they were disobedient and people, and they were kuffar or munafiqun, they were hypocrites, which is problematic, as we know, to take such a strong stance. And they claimed that they knew that the Prophet said that Ali should lead, and so they purposely denied Ali access to the Khilafah. And so all those who did that were sinful. And so these are some of the issues which are there. And so with ahlus-sunnah, on the other hand, the imama is not as important as it is with the Shia, because for us, imama is a wajib, as opposed to a rukn min arkan al-iman. For the Shia, it's a tenet of faith. You have to believe in the imam. If you don't believe in the imam, you're not a mu'min. You're not a believer. It's from arkan al-iman. For us, it's wajib. Nasb al-imam, to erect an imam or khalifa is an obligation. If no one does it, then everyone else bears the sin of it. If people do it, then the sin is removed from everyone else. So our sort of the boundaries of acceptance have been a bit broader amongst the Sunnah, and especially when we take into account all of the khilafat that exist in a lot of these issues we're talking about, ijma', qiyas, because the ulama, they don't declare the Shia to be kuffar because they deny what we consider to be a point of ijma'. They would say, well, if you accept the principle of ijma' and you deny what is unanimously agreed upon, then you're a kafir. But if you don't accept the concept of ijma', then you're not a kafir if you deny what we claim to be agreed upon. That's actually the position of ahlus-sunnah, that we say that. So we give consideration to, there's a certain amount of doubt. We know that it's a principle that it was introduced, but we believe that it has a very strong basis in the Sharia. So ahlus-sunnah, traditionally, we're talking about the four madhabs. On the proponents of the four schools, a majority of them, and whereas most of the Malikis historically have been, for instance, Asha'ira, most of the Shafi'is have been, as well as in the Hanafis, most of them in Maturidi, and a few of the Hanabila have been also amongst these factions. And so the Hanabila, the forces, even though the Hanabila have in certain areas differ in creed from the Ash'aris and the Maturidis, they still are included within ahlus-sunnah. That ahlus-sunnah found a space for them. And this is something that Imam Ghazali points out, and he says that, for instance, Imam Ahmed, or was described to Imam Ahmed in terms of the belief that Allah had direction. He said that the Sunnis, we have accommodated this belief. So if there's someone amongst us who believe that Allah has direction, then they're not kafir, unless they mean something in particular. As, for instance, Ibn Hajar Haythami points out in his I'lam bi Quwwat Islam, he talks about how, where if they mean by saying that he has a direction that he is sort of restricted, to a particular place, then kafar, the person's kafir. But they mean something, there's a way you can interpret it where a person is not put outside of Islam as a result of that. So the four schools have been included amongst that. Ahlus-sunnah. So anyone outside of the four schools, and in particular those who are from the creed of Abu Hasan Ash'ari, the Maturidi, and mainstream Hanbali belief, although historically the Hanbalis were not really included in terms of those who had different aqidah from Maturidi and Ash'ari. They were historically were not included among Ahlus-sunnah, at least by the mainstream Maturidi and Ash'ari, because they considered their beliefs to be anthropomorphic in a sense, and so were outside of the realm of Ahlus-sunnah, were considered to be people of bid'ah. And so, whereas today there are some who argue that they are included also within those parameters. And so it gets very sticky. You see that some who may argue for that, I would think that, for me, from what I can see and know of the Islamic history, there's no basis to make an argument that these are three schools, all three of them were accepted historically, which I don't see any evidence for that. But some have made that claim today.